Before Thanksgiving dinner, when I opened the door to the frail man asking for food, I didn't think much of it. Out of instinct, I handed him the sandwich my mother-in-law had packed for me. But as soon as he brought it close to his nose, his expression changed. His eyes widened, and his cracked lips trembled. Then, in a voice that carried both fear and recognition, he whispered, "Who gave you this? Do you even know what's inside?" Before we continue, be part of our growing family by hitting that subscribe button. And here's something fun. Share your name and tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments. We might feature you with a shout out in our next video, because your support truly means the world to us. Now, let's proceed. Thanksgiving evening had the kind of cold that pinched through sleeves and manners. Laughter spilled from the dining room in syrupy waves, the clink of polished cutlery against ceramic plates punctuating a chorus of polite insults hidden in jokes that always seemed to land on me. I opened the door because I needed air and because my mother-in-law had just placed a neatly wrapped sandwich in my hand, calling it, "Your special plate, dear, something I know you'll like." The man on the porch looked carved out of winter, a beard the color of iron, hands trembling without permission, eyes that didn't ask for pity, just food. I didn't think. I handed him the sandwich like I was passing forward a small portion of salvation. He lifted it to his face and inhaled, and something in his expression broke. The pupils dilated, the breath caught halfway, and his shoulders stiffened as though a memory had grabbed him by the spine. "Who gave you this?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "Do you even know what's inside?" I told him my mother-in-law made it. Her proud tradition, her way of keeping me included. He shook his head like he couldn't shake free of a ghost. "They tried the same thing on me 5 years ago," he said, eyes dragging past me toward the warmth behind my shoulder. "I used to cook with them. I used to be family by proxy, the invisible help. They said I stole money. I left when the accusations started, and when the seasonings tasted wrong. You smell that? Bitter almond. That's not a spice. That's the shadow of something you don't wake up from." His words slid into place like a key that had been waiting too long for a lock. Bitter almond. The phrase unspooled all the small oddities. My mother-in-law's sudden sweetness toward me this year. The way she'd insisted no one else touch my plate. The joke my brother-in-law cracked about how some people don't know their place at the table. I asked the man his name, and he told me, Aaron. The name rang a faint bell I couldn't place, like a tune I'd heard once from a distant room. I told him to wait at the corner by the oak tree where the light didn't quite reach. I promised him help, and I meant it. I slid the sandwich back into the paper, pinched the ends closed without breathing, and felt the thin weight of it press against the tendons of my wrist like a dare. Inside, the house smelled of roasted turkey, rosemary, and a familiar brand of control. I could hear my mother-in-law rehearsing compliments that felt like hooks. My wife's laugh ran a little too high above the others. It hit me, then that survival sometimes sounds like silence while your mind writes a plan. I cut through the mudroom to the garage where the deep freezer hummed under a shelf of labeled jars and tidy lies. In the old fishing tackle box, my father-in-law's pride, I kept a small forensic kit from my work as a safety officer at the lab. Evidence bags, powder-free gloves, sealable vials. I bagged the sandwich, swapped the paper with an identical wrap from their stack, and tucked the original into the bottom of a cooler with ice packs I pretended were beer chillers. The fake sandwich, 2 slices of bread, a smear of mayo, nothing else, went back into the kitchen as if nothing had changed. My heart thudded steady, not fast. Fear was a luxury, and I was exchanging it for focus. When I returned to the dining room, my mother-in-law lifted the gravy boat and looked at me like I was a stage prop that needed to hit its mark. "There you are," she sang. "Everyone's been waiting." I set the wrapped sandwich at my place, folded my napkin, and studied faces. My brother-in-law, Tyler, always sat to my right, and arm's reach from the serving dishes. My wife, Emma, sat across from me, eyes darting the way eyes do when they don't want to land anywhere obvious. My mother-in-law, Lorraine watched the room like a conductor with a hidden metronome. When the toast started, I made my move. I stood, lifted my glass, and smiled like gratitude was the only language I knew. Before we eat, I said, voice careful and even, why don't we do something different this year? A new tradition. We'll share plates. Everyone takes a bite from everyone else's dish. After all, family shares everything. The reaction rippled through the room faster than laughter ever could. Tyler's fork paused midair. Emma's knuckles whitened around her water glass. Lorraine's smile dipped then fought its way back like a mask being resecured. How generous, she said. But some of us have dietary needs. Then we should be especially careful, I answered, holding her gaze. We wouldn't want anyone to have something disagreeable. I let the silence lengthen until it felt deliberate, until it felt like the room had to pick a side between pretending and breathing. Then I sat down and broke the seal around my sandwich, lifting the paper to my nose with the casual motion of a man who trusts his family. Smells strong, I said. What did you use, Lorraine? She lifted her napkin slowly, eyes narrowing just enough to register that I was no longer where she'd placed me. I didn't take a bite. I didn't need to. The point wasn't to eat. It was to make it impossible for anyone else to let me. My father-in-law cleared his throat and diverted the room with a story about 1988 and a football game he liked to remember more than any actual achievement. I let it play out, nodding when expected, laughing on cue. But the plan had already moved beyond dinner. In the garage, the original sandwich was cooling in an evidence bag with a chain of custody form waiting for ink. On the corner by the oak, Aaron was prime witness and delayed justice wrapped in skin. The bitterness in my mouth wasn't almond. It was patience turning sharp. After dessert, pumpkin pie cut into equal slices like the family's version of fairness. The house shifted into tidy chaos. Dishes clattered, football returned to the television, and the children upstairs thumped through a world without adult weather systems. Emma found me by the garage door, her voice low and urgent. What are you doing? She whispered, the kind of whisper that curls into the ear like smoke. Eating dinner, I said. Sharing plates. You heard me. She shook her head, eyes bright with something like fear and something like loyalty confused. You're picking a fight. No, I answered. I'm choosing the battleground. She flinched at that because she understood I had stopped playing defense. I kept my voice gentle. Emma, has your mother ever done this before? The question landed between us like a glass bottle on tile. She didn't answer quickly, and silence has a way of testifying. She protected us, she said finally, which was not the same as saying no. From what? I asked. From being embarrassed, she said, meaning from me, from my different upbringing, my smaller family, my refusal to be managed. From being embarrassed, I repeated, or from being contradicted? I didn't wait for her to craft a safe sentence. I'm going to the station, I said. I'm taking a sample in, and I'm bringing a witness. I drove in silence, the cooler buckled in like an extra passenger. Aaron climbed into the back seat, hands folded, eyes fixed on a middle distance I couldn't see. When they accused you, I asked, what did they say you stole? He laughed once, short and humorless. A ring, he said. An heirloom. It went missing the night I told Lorraine her stew tasted wrong. I told her I smelled something, like almonds and cut grass. She told everyone I'd been dipping into their things, said the stress had made me paranoid. Next morning, the ring turned up in my closet at work, neat as a framed photo. I didn't fight it. I left. People choose the story that keeps them in the house. At the lab, I swiped us into the after-hours drop. The county's toxicology team had a holiday protocol, a locked bin for evidence that couldn't wait and instructions for immediate flagging. I filled out the chain of custody, sealed the bag, and left a note with my badge number and possible cyanogenic compound, bitter almond odor noted by 2 witnesses. I didn't need a full panel tonight. I needed a flag, a reason that every polite word at that table would clatter to the floor like a utensil dropped without apology. Back at the house, Lorraine was at the sink, hands in suds, face arranged in its ideal shape. "Where have you been?" she asked without looking up, the tone designed to remind me I didn't deserve question marks. "Dropping off a gift," I said. "For the county." She dried her hands slowly, one finger at a time, the way people do when they need time to put on their next expression. "We don't involve outsiders in family matters," she said. "We keep our misunderstandings private." "A misunderstanding is forgetting someone's birthday," I said. "This is chemistry." Tyler stepped into the doorway, all swagger and borrowed courage. "Man, you're dramatic," he chuckled. "It's a sandwich." I looked at him until he had to either meet my eyes or check his phone. He chose the phone. "Let's all calm down," Emma's father, Charles, said, his reasonable voice the bridge they always used to cross back into their version of normal. "Nothing happened. You didn't need it. We move on." "No," I said. "We don't move on. We move correctly." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Audio word to life. Quiet, like a room holding its breath. I had started recording at dinner when Lorraine insisted on my special plate. Not illegal in our state in a room I was part of. I played the moment when she told Emma to keep the kids upstairs until we're done with the adults' plates. Played Tyler's joke about people knowing their place. Played the point where I proposed sharing plates, and the exact second the room froze. I watched their faces reflecting back their choices, the way light reflects off water whether you want it to or not. "You think you're clever," Lorraine said finally, a small crack in her tone that she tried to smooth with disdain. "You think the police will care about a family disagreement and some bread." "The police might not care," I said, "but the lab will. And so will the board where I work, and the insurance company, and every Thanksgiving guest who heard enough to know what silence means." That night, I slept in the guest room with the door locked and my phone face down, not because I feared violence, but because I wanted them to sit in the quiet of an unfinished move. Revenge is not noise, it's timing. Morning arrived like a verdict. The call from the tox lab hit at 8:13 a.m. "We flagged your sample," the text said. "Preliminary test indicates the presence of cyanogenic glycosides. We've forwarded to the duty officer per protocol." The word protocol did what words like love fail to do in certain houses. It made everyone tell the truth. Within 30 minutes, a uniformed officer stood in the kitchen while Lorraine tried on a new costume called Misunderstood Matriarch. She explained recipes and family traditions and how I had stress from work. The officer listened with the implacable politeness of a person who has heard versions of the same play in different houses. He took a statement. He took the sealed remainder of the special plate. And then he took something they never meant to give: control of the narrative. Revenge isn't about matching cruelty. It's about restoring balance and leaving a record that can't be rewritten. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make speeches. I brought receipts. Aaron sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug Emma placed in front of him with the careful distance of someone ashamed of a story she once accepted without reading. He told the officer his version. How he'd cooked for the family, how he'd been accused, how Bitter Almond had showed up the night a ring vanished, how he'd walked out and never walked back. His voice didn't tremble where it used to. Anger had cooled into clarity. The officer took notes, eyes moving between us and the house that had expected to be the only witness to itself. When the officer left with evidence and a promise of follow-up, the house collapsed into the honesty people reserve for closed doors. "You're breaking this family," Lorraine hissed. "Bare now? No satin over the steel." "I'm not breaking it," I said. "I'm refusing to be the brace that holds it in the wrong shape." Tyler swore under his breath and knocked over a chair. It was the most original thing he'd done in years. Charles looked smaller, like the act of being reasonable had finally cost him more than it gave. Emma's eyes shone with water she wouldn't let spill, and in that moment I made a decision about revenge that had nothing to do with handcuffs. I turned to Emma. "You don't have to choose me over them," I said, voice steady but gentle. You have to choose the truth over the lie. She exhaled, a sound like a knot coming undone. I didn't know, she said. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know it was this. You did know? Lorraine snapped. You've always known. He's an interloper. He makes us look less. Emma looked at her mother then, really looked, and I watched a lifelong script go up in quiet flame. You care about how we look, Emma said, not who we are. The officer returned that afternoon with a warrant to collect kitchen items related to the sandwich, the cutting board, the knife set, a jar of crushed kernels labeled for baking that didn't belong in any modern recipe. Lorraine tried to laugh it off, but the sound fell flat, short of the ceiling. In the evening, the station called me to confirm the preliminary results had escalated. They were expanding the investigation to include prior incidents, including Aaron's claim and any other family misunderstandings that matched the pattern. I tipped them to the missing ring story. The detective's tone changed, like a lock yielding under the right pressure. We'll be in touch, he said, and it meant they would, not with courtesy, but with paperwork. Here was the hard part of revenge, the part nobody romanticizes in cinematic cuts. I filed for a protective order and moved the rest of our belongings out of the house that night with 2 friends, a locksmith, and a refusal to feel guilty. I offered Aaron a room for a month and the number of a counselor who specialized in people who'd been scapegoated by systems dressed up as families. I was building a table that wouldn't poison anyone who sat at it. 2 weeks later, the ring turned up at a pawn shop across town, traced through an online sale to a burner account linked to Tyler's email. When confronted, he said he was holding it for a friend, a line that had carried him through adolescence but found no purchase in adulthood. Lorraine lawyered up and tried to reframe the entire episode as a malicious misunderstanding by a resentful son-in-law. The lab results did not feel misunderstood. Charles, finally free of being the voice of compromise, told the detective about the time he had gotten violently ill after Lorraine's special chili, the night before he signed a financial document she wanted. He hadn't thought much of it then because the lie said love and the truth said leverage. The case widened. The family narrowed. On the first Sunday of Advent, I cooked dinner in our apartment kitchen with the windows fogged from steam and the kind of silence that felt like room, not threat. Emma chopped onions with a rhythm that sounded like a new heartbeat. I called the detective, she said, laying the knife flat and straight. I told him what I should have said years ago. I told him about the night Mom said you needed to learn your place, and I laughed because it was easier than disagreeing. I slid the pan off the heat and turned to her fully. This isn't penance, I said. It's practice. We're going to build a life where nobody gets sick from what they're served. She nodded, holding my gaze the way she hadn't at that table, the way people hold a vow. On Christmas Eve, the culinary school called Aaron with an offer for a permanent position. When he told me, the sound of his voice filled the room like music does when you open a door to a party you're finally invited to. The detective emailed to say charges were pending for tampering with food and fraud related to the ring. The email was clinical, a tally of statutes and dates, but to me it read like an exorcism, a proof that the spell of the old house had broken. I printed it and slid it into a folder labeled receipts in block letters that meant we would never again rely on memory alone. On New Year's Day, we set up a folding table in the community room of our building, laid out plates of food that nobody needed to fear, and invited the neighbors we only waved to before. I stood by the door with a tray of sandwiches, simple ones, honest ones, and waited. When the first knock came, I opened the door and found a face I didn't recognize, but a need I did. I handed over a plate. The man inhaled and smiled. "What's in it?" he asked, because questions are how we keep ourselves alive. "Just what we say," I answered. "And if you want to check, we'll show you the recipe." He laughed, and in his laugh I heard the clean sound of a table being set the right way. That was my revenge. Not the handcuffs, though they came. Not the humiliation, though they felt it. It was the permanence of the record, the redrawing of the map, the refusal to forget the smell of bitter almond, and the man who taught me to trust my instinct when the house demanded otherwise. I didn't return to their Thanksgiving, and they didn't return to the story where I ate quietly. In our story, we share plates because we can. We share receipts because we must. And we never again pretend that love and control are the same seasoning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us.